So this month, we're talking about the emotional function of your emotional and binge eating. Why do you do this behavior that you know you don't want to be doing? You know it comes with lousy side effects, and yet you still find yourself eating even when you're not hungry. What is that about? Using food as a way to distract from distressing emotions. Can you relate to that? So, what do we mean by distressing emotions? Well, these are going to be anything that you feel that's really uncomfortable. So, it could be things like anxiety, anger, boredom, sadness, loneliness, confusion, jealousy. There's a whole range of emotions that we feel that oftentimes feel very uncomfortable. And what's most distressing for people about this emotional experience is they don't really know what to do with these emotions. And when you don't know what to do with these emotions, it's only natural for your brain to try to come up with some strategy to get you away from this very thing that's causing you distress. And in walks the thoughts about food, right? So if you think about binging, even long before you get to the act of binging, there could potentially be a lot of time that happens where you are thinking about the binging, planning it out, thinking about what food you're going to get, where you're going to get it from, what time you're going to be able to binge, where you're going to be able to binge. And that process of thinking about the binge and anticipating it and planning it in and of itself can serve as a mental distraction or a thought distraction from whatever's causing you distress. Then we get to the binge episode, and of course, that can take you into a huge space of distraction where you're only focusing on the eating. In fact, a lot of my clients will describe it as feeling like they're in a zone. They're not thinking about anything else other than the food that's right in front of them. And then, unfortunately, after a binge, as maybe you've experienced, there's often a lot of self-loathing, beating yourself up, thoughts like, why did I do that? I know better. I shouldn't have done that. What's wrong with me? And as uncomfortable as those thoughts are, they're still a distraction from the original distress that triggered you in the first place. Now, for some people who struggle with emotional and binge eating, these thoughts can then segue into more deprivation-based or diet-based thoughts as a way to compensate for the binge that just happened. So you may find yourself then starting to think, okay, what can I do to make up for this? Well, tomorrow I'm going to eat salads all day, or starting on Monday, I'm not going to eat sugar anymore. And then you start to plan out how you're going to do that. You start thinking about what foods am I going to eat? What meals am I going to make? How am I going to avoid this social situation where there will be sugar or alcohol or carbs or whatever it might be? And even those thoughts become distractions from the original source of distress. So all of this focus on food, binging, overeating, undereating, weight, and body image are distractions from the distress. So what do you do instead? You know, we're all about giving you education and inspiration. So let's talk about what you can do instead to deal with distress without the distraction of food. Now, the first thing I want you to look at is starting to pay attention to when you feel distress and the relationship that that has with then the thoughts of food. So I want you to notice when you feel distress, where you feel that in your body. And in fact, what I find is a lot of my clients tend to feel distress in what I call the food corridor. So kind of from their throat down into their abdomen. And they really notice a lot of tension, tightness, anxiety that lives in this part of their body. And eating is an attempt to try to soothe that part of the body. But of course, it doesn't work. So notice if you feel distress in what I call this food corridor, you may also notice certain thoughts that pop into your head when you're emotionally distressed. Things like, ooh, I want pizza, or ooh, I want that candy bar. Notice if those spontaneous thoughts around food pop in right when you feel distressed. That's going to be a sign to you that something emotional is going on. Once you start to notice that distress is present for you, maybe you can even label it, then I want you to work on trying to get that distress outside of your body. Now, the most obvious way to get it outside of your body is to try to talk it out. Talk it out with a friend if you can, or someone that you trust. But what I find is that for a lot of emotional and binge eaters, sharing this part of themselves with somebody else can be a really vulnerable experience and something that they don't really like doing. So another alternative that you have is to actually talk out loud to yourself. It can be really helpful. So if you're in the car alone, talk out loud to yourself about whatever's causing you distress. Everyone around you will just think you're on Bluetooth. It's no big deal. If you're at home by yourself, talk out loud to yourself. It can be so helpful to get these thoughts and these emotions outside of you verbally. Another great way to do this is to use writing. So journaling or typing, getting it down on paper or on your computer as a way to get it outside of you can be particularly helpful. If you're not much of a writer, I want you to try art. See if that can help you. And I am not talking about beautiful artistic masterpieces. Most people, when I say this, are like, oh, I'm not an artist, and that's okay. What I'm talking about is using colors and shapes to simply get this material outside of you. So it could be scribbling, it could be stick figures. Those are totally fine in my book. It could be coloring books if you want, even coloring books for kids. And another great strategy that's using art is collaging. So if you're not even sure what you're feeling, a really great thing you can do is open up a magazine. Give yourself permission to just start cutting out any words or images that speak to you. You don't even have to know why they speak to you. Cut them out, glue them down on paper. Take a step back and look at the complete collage and see if a theme emerges that might give you some insight into the distress that's going on for you. And then lastly, another great way to get this outside of you is to go for a walk and use that energy. Emotions have energy, so get that energy out, move around, and get your brain activated, and it will actually reprocess some of those emotions that are coming up for you. So this is about a 20 to 30 minute gentle walk that can be really effective. This does not need to be an exercise walk by any means, but just getting up, moving around, and you may find that some organic emotional processing happens and you actually feel better.